nervous because I'm here now.
Hey guys, welcome into another episode of 410 Sports Talk. I'm James Haskell, as always, here with my co-host Glenn Martin. We have a familiar guest who has come on the show before, Ken McKusick from Film Study, Ravens Film Study. Ken, why don't you introduce yourself to our listeners and our viewers, and then we'll get right into the questions.
Yeah, hi James, Glenn. Ken McKusick, filmstudybaltimore.com is my website. If you come there, a lot of great podcasting. A lot of good analytics studies too, particularly this off season. Had some good stuff done by Dan Reese and also by Sarah Ellison doing an analytics study on how running quarterbacks don't get hurt any more than more traditional drop back quarterbacks.
Yes, and I've quoted that article by Sarah many times in the comments section when I've heard that Lamar is one hit away many times. But Ken, thanks again for coming on. And a lot of fans still, and I guess some players still also aren't over that playoff loss to the Titans. So even though it's a while ago, I had to ask you one question. We're kind of still scratching our heads as to why the Ravens seemingly went away from a game plan that was working all season, where they ran the ball like crazy and threw it and made big chunk plays when necessary. Why did it seem like they abandoned a game plan that worked so well all season long in that Titans game?
Well, I mean, I don't think they really did until the game was at a point where they couldn't really do anything. I mean, the number of plays different that could have been additional incremental runs instead of passes was, it was 4 or 5 in the game. It wasn't a whole lot. They ran a Ravens record 92 offensive plays in that game. So they never ran that many before in a single game. They really controlled the movement of the ball up and down the field with 530 offensive yards. So it wasn't really the offense that let them down in terms of average plays. It's just every big play they lost. They lost both 4th and 1s. They had 2 other 4th down plays that failed. They had, the turnovers, the 2 turnovers that were both huge plays. And they allowed 2 big plays to the Titans offense, the 66-yard play on 3rd and 1 and the 45-yard touchdown play immediately after the first turnover. So, the game got away from them much the way Super Bowl III got away from the Colts. It was just they got to a certain point on the field and all of a sudden they couldn't function anymore. And unfortunately the Ravens, had some very poor results in some high leverage situations, and I don't think it was really honestly about abandoning the run. I think that most of what they did was dictated to them. They had, to give you an idea, they had 30 plays, I believe it was, might have been 31 in the fourth quarter, and all but 1 were passing plays. And of course they were down 28-6 or whatever entering the fourth. So
gotcha.
Yeah, it's still a tough pill to swallow, that's for sure. Now, as far as this year goes, all through training camp, the preseason last year, one guy kept making plays. Of course, that was Miles Boykin. When it comes to the receivers, he seemed to flash on the screen. We were super excited because it seemed like he was, the only big body receiver we had. But then he comes up with 13 receptions, under 200 yards. It was not what we were necessarily expecting. So, Ken, was Boykin's lack of success solely due to the lack of targets, or were there other reasons why he didn't light it up in the stat sheet last year?
Yeah, he didn't have a great year as a receiver, period. In fact, he was a player that I pointed to as being someone who needed to make a step forward between year 1 and 2. His off season was one of the most important. We have an episode out on that goes into a lot more depth because it's really a very long topic to talk about what Miles Boykin didn't do properly as a receiver last year. He didn't run routes exceptionally well. There were times when he stopped as a receiver. There are other times in the red zone he looked very effective. So I think, one of the key things is going to be to develop trust with Lamar on where the ball is going and when, so he knows exactly when to cut off his routes, to be ready for it when he turns, to be trusted to make the one-on-one play when he's deep down the sideline. One of the big plays he caught was actually from RG3 down the left sideline at the end of one of the games. So it's really, I think it's the Rams game. So it was really a season where Miles Boykin, I think, did a wonderful job as a blocker, but really he was his own worst enemy as a receiver.
Gotcha. Yeah, he's certainly a player that a lot of fans are excited to see what he can do this year. On the other side of the ball, Earl Thomas seems to get a lot of scrutiny from fans in Baltimore, and A lot of it stems from that iconic, picture of him being spun around by Derrick Henry in that Titans playoff game and pushed down the sideline. But I wanted to ask you, a guy who watches so much film, how valuable is Earl to this defense, and how much of what makes him so great goes unnoticed by the average fan?
I think a lot of things get unnoticed about a great free safety playing because a lot of the whole game is based on fear of, you make the quarterback not want to throw into the deep middle when you're single high. That area between the numbers, that belongs to you. And, if you want to go outside the numbers and by the sideline, you take your chances with our cornerbacks and whatnot. He doesn't have the speed he had when he was at Seattle. That's pretty clear. We saw a couple times when he pulled up on plays that had some not great look to them, like on Chubb's 88-yard run. I think that the analysis on PFF probably is too kind to him in terms of what targets get assigned to him. So if you look at targeting of plays, usually the underneath player is assigned a target when there's a bracket involved, and that will understate the number of targets in particular that a free safety has. So I wouldn't look at those things where he's been unbelievably great and say, well, Thomas is still the same player he's always been. I think Thomas rules the middle of the field still with fear. They don't throw as much deep middle on the Ravens, and they certainly didn't when he was with Seattle as well. But I don't think he's also has the speed he did when he was younger to really be the elite playmaker he was.
That's interesting because, like Glenn said, I do feel like there's a lot of stuff that goes unnoticed based on the stuff that we don't get to see that's off the screen that Earl's doing and making the offense do based on his movements. So there's some good points there. Keeping it on the defensive side of the ball, fans seem to be torn on whether or not to give Judon an extension. So our question to you really, does Judon bring enough as a run defender and a pass defender to warrant that big contract based on your breakdown?
It's a difficult one because I think it's really not based on Judon alone. It's really based on where the Ravens are going to need to spend their money over the next couple of years, and I think that's mostly you're going to have to see a migration of dollars from defense to offense. And so they have the cheapest offense in the National Football League, or one of them, and they're by far the most productive, which is a historic level of production per dollar spent. So it's really remarkable. Any kind of look at points per drive versus cap dollar spent on offense is going to show you the Ravens as just one of the most extraordinary outliers you've ever seen, even over multiple seasons of the history of the NFL. And I don't think the Ravens can get away with that, obviously, with Ronnie Stanley, with Mark Andrews, with Lamar Jackson coming up for new contracts. They also have Marlon Humphrey on the defense coming up. And they're going to have to make some tough choices. And great organizations get themselves in this position where they have to make choices between their cornerstone players that they've drafted. And it's the good position to be in that you have to let more of those guys go than you're able to sign. And there are a lot of other teams out there that sign their one guy that they still have, and that's not as good a position to be in. So anyway, that's how I feel about it.
That's a good point.
Yeah, and last year – we saw a few teams really gash the Ravens on the edges in the run game. My question for you is, was that lack of ability to stop the run, around the edges, was that more so on the inside linebackers not able to, through lack of speed or whatever that may be, get to the edges to make the tackle? Or was it the outside linebackers more so not setting the edge and pushing that running back inside? And also, did they do enough in the offseason through additions in free agency and draft to seal up that hole?
Okay, you've got the two groups correctly identified because in the nickel defense, which is what the Ravens play most, they've got 2 and 2 of defensive linemen, outside linebackers, and inside linebackers. So the defensive line, let me recapture this a little bit. Historically, the Ravens have been one of those teams that has been just extraordinary in their ability to field a front six that is so good that they basically force other offensive coordinators out of the run game even when they're in the nickel. So most offensive coordinators say, you know what, we'll play 11 personnel, which means put 3 wide receivers on the field, because we'd rather force you to put an extra cornerback on the field. We think we can run on you with 6. And they'd rather do that than run with an additional heavy of their own and allowing the defense an additional heavy of their own on the inside of that formation. So by far, offensive coordinators like to run with 11 personnel. So in order to stop the run successfully with your 2-2-2 or your 4-2, if you want to talk about it that way, you have to have two good run stuffers on the inside who are 320 pounds up of I'm not going anywhere. You have to have two guys on the outside who really know how to set the edge, and the Ravens have traditionally had those with Jarrett Johnson and Suggs and Rob Burnett and others, but they don't really have a guy right now who fits into that same mold. You know, the Ravens are hoping Ferguson will get there, but Judon is really not that guy. Bowser or Ferguson are not that guy. McPhee is probably their best edge setter, and he hasn't been able to stay on the field, and they'd probably rather use him as a pass rusher to get more effectiveness out of him there and limit his snaps. So they've been looking for that outside linebacker who can actually stop the run. Ward provided them a little bit of that when he came in and did some good things, but he's not the answer either. Inside linebacker was an enormous problem in the first 4 games. They really got that shored up pretty well with the Fort and Bynes additions as the season went on. So if you're looking at yards per carry also, there is another factor involved, is that the Ravens had a lot of big leads in games, and when they did, they were happy to put the dime defense on the field, which means they're playing they're not playing 2-2-2 anymore, they're really playing 2 defensive linemen, 2 outside linebackers, 1 inside linebacker, and 1 safety as an inside linebacker, which gives you a smaller look still. And when they did that, they had opposing teams run fairly effectively against them, but it wasn't at times where it was meaningful. So for the best examples of the Texans game, they played a ton of dime and quarter, and the Texans ripped off a couple of late runs for 58 yards, 17 and 41. I know against Buffalo, this is the big one that I like to quote. Buffalo ran against the dime defense 9 times for 87 yards in that game, 9.7 yards per run, which seems terrible, except they also threw the ball 20 times against that dime defense for a total of 7 yards, 0.4 yards per play. So on balance, great defense to have on the field, but it looked bad against the run. So I think a lot of the willingness of the Ravens to allow other teams to run in this year, which we have not seen before, was really a case of having a big lead in games and being willing to live with a dime defense and higher than average run results.
All right, well, I think that makes Glenn and I feel a little bit better about our run defense. Speaking of the run game, want to move over to the other side of the ball. The running back room is one that's being talked about based on the addition of J.K. Dobbins. But we want to get your take on a few things, and pardon the fact that this is going to be a little loaded here, but we want to ask you a couple things. One of the things is I want to bring up Justice Hill and Gus Edwards. People seem to be all over the place when it comes to their values, their individual value to the team as players. Based on your analysis, do you have any idea as to, could you give any clarity as to their value as players in the running back room? And then aside from that, one of the things, of course, that we noticed just from, easy stats to pick at is Justice had less than 4 yards per carry. Every other back had considerably more. I think every other back was over 5 last year. Was that just due to his poor play, or were there other factors that were involved that contribute to that number?
See, Justice had so few carries, it's really hard to pin it on poor play, quote unquote, for any period of time. So I don't think that was it. I do think that he needs to show more as a receiver. He caught only 3 of 7 balls thrown his way, which some people say, well, that's on the quarterback, and some of it is, but some of it is also in him making himself available for these easy pitch and catch throws that he should get as a running back. So anyway, I think that was, him not being able to do things as a receiver is what really I would be more focused on. The other thing about Hill was I think he really showed up in Week 16 against Week 17, against a very motivated Steelers team, and looked very good in that game as a power runner. Something we hadn't really anticipated seeing. I think of him more as a smaller, faster back, but he really showed up as a power runner in that final game of the year with that 8-yard touchdown run where he broke 3 tackles. I think it was 6 or 8 yard touchdown run. Mm-hmm. So, I in terms of does he still have value? I think he does. I think that the Dobbins move is actually a move to replace Ingram after this season. So the Ravens have decided they're not going to go with Ingram's third year of the contract, which makes kind of sense because they need that money. They need it very badly. And they'll probably release him after this year, and then it'll be a three-headed monster again with Edwards and Hill. Edwards' future, I think it's probably in a little bit of doubt, but he could be had for $3 million next year, which is pretty cheap for the quality of back he's given the Ravens, and I think he would probably be kept at that level. If not, they'll find somebody else because they're very much a style for style, one for one alternating team that is tried to stay cheap at running back.
Well, with the addition of Kenyon Barner and what he brings as also a punt returner and kick returner, it seems like he may be more versatile than a player like a Justice Hill, whereas he can also help out with the pass catching duties as you mentioned. Does bringing in Kenyon Barner lessen the need to have Justice Hill on this team?
Potentially, Hill is a second-year player, so he's got 3 years still of very cheap play on his rookie deal left. The Ravens are always loath to give up on such opportunity. So all the notion that Hill would be somehow cut this year, I think is very unlikely. You cut a player in year 3 if he's going nowhere. So Jaleel Scott's on the bubble this year, from that sense. Or you cut a player in year 4 when you don't really think you can use him that year, or you try and trade him because he has no future value after his contract runs out. And basically, being an NFL GM, as I look at it, is solely about how can I beat the cap on as many players as possible. So if you're you have to get more value from that player than what he's costing you in terms of cap. And the Ravens have always followed that model of basically drafting guys and making sure that they fully value the option they still had with them on the first initial 4 years of their contract. So I don't think Hill's going anywhere. I don't know what it means in terms of the rest of the roster to say what Barner's acquisition could mean.
Yeah, that's going to be definitely something interesting that we're going to keep our eye on. One other question about the running back room before we move on. You talked about J.K. Dobbins looking to be the guy that will replace Ingram in the coming year, not necessarily this year, but the following. What have you seen from him in your film breakdown as far as his days in Ohio State, and what are your expectations of him in his rookie year?
Well, I'd expect Dobbins to take over as the primary running back within fairly short order, certainly by the end of this year. The good news is he's coming from a system where he's played a lot of mesh already, meaning he's played a lot of zone read type run game. So he should understand how to work the mesh, but working the mesh with his college quarterback as opposed to working the mesh with Lamar Jackson is going to be very different because Lamar Jackson really forces the defense to react a certain way, and that's all predicated on his ability to read at any point through a slowed down mesh point as it's occurring. So he wants to get that right defensive end, the left defensive end, the one to the offense's right side, to basically plant his feet or make a choice. And he's expert. He's like no one I've ever seen. And when I say that, no athlete I've ever seen in terms of running that zone read and reading the opponent's leverage. One of the things about Lamar is he gets in the open field. The guy, we have no idea how fast Lamar is, how fast he really could be, because I don't think we've ever seen him at top speed. He's never really running full speed. He's running at this controlled rate where his primary objective is how do I beat the next guy down the field and not how do I turn it on and burn. And in fact, I really haven't seen him run away from defensive backs. I think reports of his speed are probably somewhat overrated in terms of just how fast he is. I don't believe he's in the 4.3s, for example. I think he's probably a 4.4s guy, which is flying, by the way. There's no shame in that. But what he is, he's the Babe Ruth of reading opponent leverage. He's just completely changed the game in terms of knowing how to match his steps up with how the other guys are setting their leverage.
Yeah, he might also be the best open field runner in the league, which is crazy as a quarterback. But with Marshall Yanda leaving due to retirement, I kind of have some curiosity about what his impact was. We know he was a fantastic player, but more than that, was he the one making the calls on the offensive line? How much was he responsible for other than just playing right guard. And what does Fluker look like, as he seems to be the odds-on favorite to replace him?
Yeah, so they'll miss Marshall from that position, from leadership, from all of the things it means. Offensive line play often falls down into categories where you have a lot of set responsibilities, and then you have the glue guys who will take their responsibility but also shift their responsibility very effectively when they see, there's a hole in the other part of the boat, so to speak, and it's not their responsibility to fill. Yanda, fantastic bailout block player. So when he'd get on an inside double team on a pass block and he saw the tackle was in trouble, he'd hand off and immediately, work to the edge. James Hurst at the beginning of the 2018 season, I think, survived a lot at right tackle because of some great bailout blocks from Yanda. And it's just something they will undoubtedly miss on the offensive line. You're going to have a guy comes in, Fluker, who's a bigger guy and able to move people perhaps even more effectively, but he may not play with as much leverage, even though he certainly has the length and weight to do so. Fluker, I don't know if you guys know this, had the 5th longest arms ever measured in combine history. And you having that at guard is perfect for opening the front gate and torquing your opponent in the direction you want to torque him to open the gate on the right-handed run game and with the pulling and the runs they do. I mean, Yanda was great at it in terms of pivoting through there, but Fluker has the ability to do it, has the raw gifts to do it. We'll just see if he can. And by the way, I think that's also why they drafted Tyree Phillips. They think he's got that ability too. They've seen the lockout 35-plus inch arms that he has, and the ability to get inside the armpits of the opposing player, and that's what'll really make him valuable as a guard, is his ability to twist that guy in that situation and be able to torque him as he pivots for a pull play or a run to the right.
Well, Jimmy, if I could just ask one quick follow up to that, because the offense, the arm length, it is amazing, because they take Orlando Brown, they bring in Fluker, they take Tyree Phillips, all arm length, long arm length, and then they bring in Bredesen, who is the opposite of that. Whereas it seems to do it more with intelligence. How much could that lack of arm length affect a guy like Bredesen moving up to the next level?
Oh, it could certainly hurt him. It hurt Patrick McCary. McCary's a very short-armed guy. Bozeman got away with his arm length. They really anticipated Bozeman, I think, at center originally. Played him there a lot in the preseason in 2018. But he ended up playing at guard because that was their need. And he showed up well enough. His arm length has not really been a huge problem at left guard. I think any short arm player is going to be better probably at center in terms of his ability to block. Doesn't mean he can handle the other elements of the position, but in terms of his ability to block, any short arm player is probably going to do better there.
That's interesting. We've had a lot of conversations about the length of Bredesen's arms, but
one other T-Rex arms, man. I call them T-Rex arms. It's just mean.
One last question about the offensive line, and particularly about Marshall. How much is his absence, do you think, going to impact a guy like Orlando Brown? You talked about how he helped James Hurst and made sure he was able to survive. I feel like, once again, this is just my outlook on it, Orlando was able to play more instinctively and a little looser because he had that guy next to him who he knew was going to help him be in the right spot, bail him out like you were talking about. What sort of impact do you see that having on Orlando Brown's season?
Right. I don't disagree. I think there's probably a lot of truth to that. So Brown may struggle more if there's not a glue guy in there at right guard who can help him out on some plays. But the guy who's really helping Brown more than anybody else is Jackson, because his style of play and the fact the Ravens run right most of the time, they even run right out of the pistol most of the time, even though that's supposed to disguise the left or right nature of it, makes Brown's job exceptionally easy. Now, there's two ways. On the run game, his typical responsibility on a zone read is to ignore the guy opposite him, the edge rusher or the edge setter, and instead down block for a double team with Yanda or the other right guard there. That's going to be just an unfair matchup now with Brown and Fluker hammering that poor defensive tackle. A lot of guys going to be off their pins there, and Fluker better finish them. Fluker better finish them on a regular basis. But then Brown's secondary objective is usually to move up what I call it half a level. And the half level is the easy block for a right tackle because his only job is really to create wash You always you hear about linebackers getting lost in the wash. Well, he's the wash creator. He moves up that half level, and the scraping linebacker has a lot of trouble moving by him. So he creates a situation where he's the guy who they have to get around, and that makes his blocking job actually a lot easier at that level. He doesn't have to move a lot to do it. Now, I don't think Brown is as immobile as everybody will say. I think he has some ability to get up into level 2 and do some useful things, but it sure helps to have a situation where the other guy has to get around you rather than you have to get ahead and maybe have to lunge for a block in level 2 against a quicker player. So I like how he's used in the run game that way. Let's flip over to the pass game for a second. In the pass game, you'd think, well, he's not helped there. Well, he is, and the reason is that other teams need to control their rush lanes to such an extreme degree against Jackson that Brown gets a disproportionate amount of bull rush opportunities. So, and most players maybe wouldn't like to get bull rush. Brown, that's his strength, is anchoring against that bull rush at his size, at his length. And he's very good at that. So I think that's an advantage for him as well that Jackson is really manufacturing for him is that the controlled rush lanes really give him a big edge. Jackson, by the way, remarkable year this last year in so many ways, obviously. But if you take the 23 sacks he had for minus 106 and you add that to all the scrambles he had on designed pass plays, it works out to 5.0 yards per time forced not to throw. 5.0.
Even when you include the sacks. Wow.
Including the sacks. So it's just remarkable. I mean, so you get him trapped and he has you. It's not the other way around.
It's really he's a cheat code, and yeah. We had to discuss. I don't want to just keep on this offensive line, so I'm just going to briefly go, but. We talked about how much Ronnie Stanley has benefited from this and the difference of Ronnie Stanley with Joe and with Jackson and how he became the All-Pro, how he became the greatest pass-blocking left tackle that the NFL is seeing. And a lot of that is to him, and it's got to be tougher contract time when a guy like that comes up. You're going to have to pay him a ton of money, but you wonder how much of what he does that makes him great is him or how much of it is Jackson.
Yeah, there's a lot of Jackson in there, too. You can look at some specific games to see Ronnie Stanley not completely doing the ideal job as a pass blocker and Jackson making it look like it's Swiss cheese or whatever it is, the defense. He had about 4 or 5 runs in that Arizona game that were effectively escaping the pocket left from pressure that I don't know if they're called pressures or not. They might be by systems like PFF or whatnot, but some systems, they just wipe out the pressure, including my own blocking system, if the quarterback escapes the pocket and goes for a run. So I actually scored a lot more pressures using a 3-second standard than PFF did for Stanley. Still an outstanding year, don't get me wrong. But he wasn't as perfect as others would have you believe. And by the way, this is very reminiscent. Orlando Brown in 2018 had a fine rookie year. Absolutely, I could go beyond that, but a fine rookie year, everything you could hope for. And PFF had him for 0 sacks for that year. Well, that's not how I scored it. I scored him with parts of 7 sack events totaling 3. So it's the fact that they're not giving out a partial sack is causing them to have a much lower sack total, and that would be true also sometimes of pressures and quarterback hits as well.
Gotcha. Okay, well, let's move on from the slobber knockers. With Hayden Hurst being traded away in the offseason, we know that this offense uses that third tight end a lot, and it's extremely important to have quality play there. So what type of negative impact could this offense be facing if they don't find quality third tight end play from guys like Wolf, Scarf, or Adams? And how much could they end up missing Hayden Hurst?
I think they could miss him a lot. First of all, he's a good player, and he does both aspects of the game well, exactly what they ask him to. The only thing Hurst is really not is an inline blocker, but they don't really ask him to block inline too much. They ran a formation the end of last season a lot where he was lined up next to Ricard and Jackson in the pistol, but sorry, it's not the pistol. It's really a full house backfield where Ricard and he are on either side of Jackson. I've been calling it the diamond formation. And they had a back beat directly behind Jackson. When they ran out of that formation, what they're really asking Hurst to do is not make a block at the line of scrimmage, but to go to level 2 or 3 and make a block. And that takes a special kind of player there. You need a guy with real quickness. Your typical fullback has a hard time doing it, might get lungy out in level 2 or level 3, but Hurst had the quickness and the good feet to get in front of guys, cornerbacks, safeties, and sometimes linebackers who were very quick, to make sure he could make that block and make those 10-yard runs into 30-yard runs occasionally. So that was very valuable to the Ravens. I think they will miss that aspect, and I've been trying to figure out which, if any, of their younger guys could really have the quickness to do that. And it's not really obvious who it would be. I don't think Charles Scarff has the quickness for it. It might be Wolf. He might be the guy. He might still be a step slow. And Hurst, a quick player, to be sure. They'll miss him in that regard. And then as a receiver, he had the best hands of the group in terms of what he could do with the football, and probably also was the most dangerous after the catch. In this last year, we saw obviously a glimpse of that against Buffalo in the 61-yard grab. But he's a very dangerous player. I look at Andrews, more of a guy who gets open in his zone very effectively, and Boyle, of course, is being a stud of a blocker. Very surprisingly, Boyle has had a tremendous amount of value after the catch. So it was a great complementary group of tight ends, and they will miss Hurst. I think he could go on to have a very good career. Though he's an older guy now, and the Ravens obviously figured they didn't want to have a bunch of stacked contracts there at tight end.
Right. So we've, Glenn and I once again have talked about that a lot, and think that will be a point of emphasis and something to watch throughout the season. But you've mentioned how incredible Lamar Jackson's season was last year, and everyone seems to be talking about him needing to throw outside the numbers better. And some of the numbers that we've looked at, and some of the charts and things that we've looked at, beg to differ. But was he an outlier in how infrequently he threw outside the numbers, or was his lack of, was there a real lack of success when he was throwing outside the numbers? What did you see there from him as far as that's concerned?
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking interceptions for starters, and the only thing I can really remember of an interception was a Pittsburgh game where he did have an interception on a very poor decision on the left sideline. I'm trying to think of other times when he had an interception, because a lot of those were tips specifically by Andrews where the ball was basically on target and Andrews manufactured an interception for the opponent, or it was a little high. Against the Tennessee game, there was a wind-blown ball that Andrews touched that might not have been right on target that ended up being an interception by Byard, I believe. Yep. But anyway, I think they did not throw outside the numbers very often. He's very careful with the football. He may figure that he's not taking the same care with the football to throw outside the numbers at all. But I think that he's going to have to come to trust Boykin out there and the ability to go get the football. And, I think he does trust Hollywood. He knows to out-throw a defense when he throws the ball to Hollywood, and Hollywood has a good chance to run it down. I don't think he has that same degree of trust for Boykin yet in terms of figuring out what he's going to be able to do in terms of winning a jump ball or just making sure that a ball doesn't get intercepted if he doesn't.
So this is my real question I've been trying to figure out, though. So say Lamar never improves on that aspect of his game, right? He never improves on throwing outside the numbers, which is, once again, the point of emphasis in the offseason. Is there ever going to come to time, because I love when people say this, they figured him out. They watched film on him. They figured him out, this, that, and the other. Is there ever going to come to a time where it's extremely limiting to his game? I mean, last year, if he never gets any better than last year, he had a monumental season. I mean, I'm signing up for another 8 to 10 of those. That's okay with me. But so how important is it for him and our team in general, moving forward?
I think, first of all, I don't think Lamar will be able to have the statistics he did last year, even if he plays a little better. I think there's just too much of a combination of circumstance and the fact that everybody else was not familiar with who he was. And I'm not really putting it as figuring it out as much as the defenses reacting to Lamar have so many more potential areas for growth than Lamar does as a quarterback versus those same defenses. So you think of it that way, and each team is going to make adjustments to the other. It's just the defense has far more opportunities to react to what Lamar's doing than the other way around. And, the other thing I'd look at is Lamar will have a uneven pattern of loss of speed over the years and maybe of loss of ability to fool people because it's really about reading leverage. And as that shows up, he's going to need to be a better quarterback in terms of a lot of other things that he did at an okay level only during his MVP season. He needs to be able to run a no-huddle offense legitimately, and we didn't really see that. He needs to be able to realign people and call timeout as necessary at the line of scrimmage when things aren't right, and we saw some specific instances where that didn't occur. So I think there's a lot of things he needs to get better as a field general, and I do think that'll happen. So I have a guy on my show, fairly often, Coach Evans, and he always says when he when he loses his speed, he'll just be Russell Wilson. Yeah.
And you mentioned that the defenses have more to grow, but didn't we see countless times last year where the defense did make the right call? They did have a guy in position to make the play, and Lamar just erased him by making him miss. Can't we still look forward to those moments while he still has his speed? He's only 23. Yeah. Don't you think he could still make up for? Yeah, they may have figured out they might have a guy there, but it really doesn't matter because he's just not good enough.
Right. Well, I think there's still that opportunity. I think that the left defensive ends and outside linebackers rushing from the offensive right side still have not figured out what they need to do to get to Lamar Jackson. Some people have suggested just hit Lamar Jackson on every play. Well, good luck. I mean, you're trying to hit a young Ali in terms of if you're Sonny Liston, it's just ridiculous. So it's something that everybody thinks they might have the answer to, and I think a defensive coordinator after defensive coordinator has probably said, "I know what we can do. We'll just put a guy over here, and that'll stop it." So. Anyway, there are adjustments to be made on both sides, but Jackson's ability to beat people one-on-one and read their leverage properly is what makes him unbelievably great, and it's what gives that Ravens offense the extra juice it needs at a lot of positions other than quarterback.
Yeah. All right. Well, the one last player that we're so excited that's finally, hopefully, going to make it onto the field and make an impact on the defensive side is Tavon Young. I mean, everyone has been waiting to see what this guy can do since he got that big contract. The Ravens obviously think, he's got a lot of talent or they wouldn't have given him all that money. So what can a true slot corner like Tavon bring to this already talented secondary?
Yeah, it'll be a big addition. Having the change of direction skills back at slot corner will help that position, obviously, but also allowing Marlon Humphrey to move back to the outside, which is where he's naturally a boundary defender and uses those baseball bat-like arms to bludgeon the ball loose. He's a lot more well-suited to do that on the outside than he is in the slot. And he's a great player, so they moved him to the slot. He's a very physical player, which is good for the slot. I think it bodes well for Marlon's ability to transition to safety at some point later in his career. He could have 6-8 years at corner and then move to safety. And I think his physical style of play matches up very well with what you'd expect there. So I know I'm talking Marlon here, but Marlon, I think, really has a better Hall of Fame chance than a lot of corners who are at the same level playing as him right now, because I think he has that transition to safety to look forward to, while a lot of them can't. And Marcus Peters would be in that group that his physical skills just don't make sense at safety. He's got to play corner and derive whatever value he can in his Hall of Fame bid for the rest of his career, because I don't see him moving to safety. Back to Tavon though for a second. He's been very good when he's played in the slot, and he brings all kinds of wonderful ball hawkishness, whether it's a ball on the ground, a ball in the air, the ability to change direction, the ability to react quickly to that football. That is exactly what you want in that nickel corner. It's a starting position. It's not a backup anymore in the NFL. The Ravens only played 10.6% of their snaps in the base defense last year, so they almost always play with a nickel corner on the field. And he is one of the most important Ravens in terms of what he can produce in 2020, because they don't really have a backup for that position.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be an interesting one. It's funny because, and we'll let you go with this, but I mentioned before the show started that OBJ wanted nothing to do with Marlon when they got in that scuffle because the baseball bat arms is a great, painted picture that you put. The way you put it was perfect there. So, Ken, thanks for coming on the show. We appreciate it. Why don't you? What we'll do is we'll put in our description your Twitter handle and of course the website. Where can they find the podcast? Is it on any of is it on any place where you listen to podcasts or one in particular?
It's on all of them. So look for a film study, one word, Ravens, and you should have it coming up. Should pop up with Ravens podcast as one of the most well-known one. We got a good number of listens, so you won't have any problem finding it. The website is filmstudybaltimore.com. That has some nice videos out there. One video I'd like to plug for your people, since it sounds like you have a good technical audience and whatnot. Take a look at What's That Defense. It's a video that's been out there for a while, but it lets you look at the defenses that were played in 2018, and there's a separate one for 2019, and identify it quickly from your seat. So whether you're at the ballpark or you're on your couch, it'll allow you to look at who's playing defense for the Ravens where and quickly identify that defense.
Nice. That sounds awesome. That's really cool. Well, thanks again, Ken, for your time. Appreciate it. And hopefully we'll talk to you soon.
All right. Take it easy, guys.
See you later.
Ken.